or they were subpoenaing an AP reporter, I believe, all of the phones in their office to say who from the government called the Associated Press. These are associational methods. They didn't get the content of the calls, but they were trying to figure out what was going on. When we think about how we fix these programmatically, when we think about these in terms of protocols, we need to have protocols that are resistant to traffic analysis. They need to be padded, basically, even if there's some level of performance penalty. So you can't look at differences in, for example, Skype conversations and tell which phoneme or word was spoken based on packet size, the signaling speed, so on and so forth. You also need to use some sort of mixed routing, some sort of shared infrastructure that divorces the individual connection from the individual origination point. And that's still a hard problem. We haven't solved that in sort of a performance respecting manner. Tor does a really good job, but Tor is also TCP only, it doesn't have a UDP, and a lot of other things like that. But this is something that's better to really get down and have everybody get in together, sort of red team. Somebody pitches an idea, and the other people in the community, whether that's Twitter, whether that's a mailing list, they tear it down. It's the peer review model. That's how we do these things and we fix it. We need people to attack these systems. We need people to work as adversaries to try to find holes so we can fix them. And there's also the user experience issue. For example, GPG is robust and pretty reliable encryption. Unfortunately, it's damn near unusable. I mean, it's fine if you're comfortable with command line. It's fine if you're good with key management. But again, GAM at the home is never going to be able to do that sort of thing. We need encryption, mixed routing. We need non-attributable communications or unattributable internet access, UIA, for example, that's available to people, that's easy, that's transparent, and that's reliable, that we can use not just here in the United States, but around the world. Because, again, this is a global problem. The National Security Agency, the FBI, these guys led the way because we've got the biggest budgets and we're the most aggressive when it comes to that kind of thing. But we're only the first. We're not the last. This is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And we have to, the grad students of the world have to be thinking about what they can do to fix this. They need to think in adversarial terms. They need to think about how are the worst people on earth going to try to subvert and break your system, to not just damage individuals, but to damage governments, to shield themselves from oversight and accountability. And what can you do? What do you know? What can you think up to help shield us from that? And the techniques are only limited by our imagination.
Yeah, John, a couple things. Okay. I hope people are taking notes here or in the darkness or texting the suggestions. He's giving you your marching orders. Okay.
They know this stuff. I don't know.
It suggests two things to me. I've got a lag here. I'll have to take this off. By the way, I have to say, with my hearing problem, the reverberation earlier before these was such that I missed a lot. I'm sorry, and I look forward to seeing it rebroadcast, on the web. I missed a lot of what Ed was saying. I'm sorry to say, but now I can with this. Not when I'm talking, though. It was a lag. Two things. We've been talking a lot about your people out here and Ed helping sources. Is of extreme importance, helping sources anonymously and without being attributable, get their information to journalists, to journalists essentially, and to the public, and to Congress, very possibly. For example, with the overhearing that we've just heard about, of Feinstein by CIA, it's a real trick to get this stuff even to the Intelligence Committee, which is kind of a black hole for information anyway, but can't get it to them without the CIA knowing. There is also the problem there of it going directly after journalists, and if this is what I was thinking, if you are successful in inspiring the people here to find ways of software that they can really use, with even as, I'm not even on Twitter, for example. At my age, it's enough to be on email. But easy to use. Then they need, right now, when they can find the sources and shut them off, that gives you your government-controlled press, a government press that is simply authorized information from the government, whether it's classified or not. They put out a lot of information that is classified because it supports their programs and their reputation and whatnot. So most leaks of classified information are actually authorized by an agency or a high official, whatnot. But supposing it becomes possible now for that handful of whistleblowers really to get the information in, then they would want to go after the bylines journalist who prints it. Now, so far, they have not done that. They accept the idea that the public will go along with prosecutions of officials who signed a non-disclosure agreement, as I did, or you did. And without really thinking of the fact that that agreement is not subject in corporations or elsewhere to criminal prosecution, to punishment by prison or whatnot. It's subject to a lot of other things, like ostracism and losing your job, which is enough to keep people silent anyway. But supposing now that gets harder to do and they can't shut off all the sources. They haven't yet gone against the freedom of the press idea by directly prosecuting journalists. Assange, they have kept on ice here all this time with a grand jury going, with the threat basically that they're going to go after him on the grounds that he's not a real journalist, something like that. I mean, in-between person. But actually, of course, as you know, and I know, the people, Assange didn't do anything that could possibly really be prosecuted that wasn't also done by the New York Times and by the Guardian and by the Observer, which they're reluctant to go after. It's my opinion, I'm putting this to you, but my opinion, that lies next on the grounds that supposed journalist called Michael Kinsley accused Glenn Greenwald, and Peter King has done the same, and I think a number of others. And that is, you guys, you journalists, are aiding and abetting a crime, a criminal, with the assumption being from the beginning that the leaking is criminal. You know, I raised that question as to whether that should be regarded as constitutional to regard us as criminals. But if you do unequivocally regard us as criminals, and people like you, then the logic that people who are helping them get their information to the public are indeed helping, for sure, that's what they are doing. But aiding and abetting is a legal term, and it has to do with a crime. And perpetrating, wasn't it David Gregory who asked Greenwald, you know, insofar as you are aiding and abetting, he's saying, insofar as you are a criminal, why should you not be punished? So listening to you, I was really thinking, I didn't bring it up before, to accept that the giving the information is unequivocally criminal, is, I think, the first step almost surely to going along with Kinsley and Gregory and so many others. Aiding and abetting, or rather helping publishing, is also criminal. Seems logical, normal. And they will go after that as well. So, I don't know, is that something you thought about or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really complex topic, and I think when we talk about whether or not the government begins going after journalists, this is the real sticking point for me, because in terms of my political philosophy as it relates to technology here, is, I would say, almost Stallman-esque. When you think about free software, we need to think about software as a means of expressing our freedom, but also defending our freedom. Governments rely on the same technologies we do. They adopt the same standards. They use the same products. And this happens worldwide. So the solution to that, when you ask me, is whether or not the United States government can manage to behave itself, to restrain itself against violating the Constitution, against bringing suits against journalists, against limiting the freedom of the press. Other governments will make different decisions. And if we want to live in a better, more enlightened world, what we need to do is we need to remove those capabilities from the governments by enshrining our rights into our means of communications, by denying them those capabilities, at least on a massive, untargeted level. Because, you know, you can't pitch a zero day at every mobile phone and every computer that's out there, or it's going to get caught. It's going to get caught by a researcher, and it's going to end up on, The Verge, Ars Technica, or any one of these other sites. And there's going to be a post-mortem of their malware. It's going to be reused and repurposed. They're going to find it out. They're going to trace it back to you. But governments can still pursue their legitimate needs for law enforcement, for intelligence collection, on a targeted basis by using those 0 days only when they are the least intrusive and essential means of getting the intelligence that they require. But it sort of shuts them out of doing this on a broad social level where they target every journalist that's out there, every news agency. And this is the way I think in the future we need to focus more and more toward how we do this. And when you talk about journalists like David Gregory, like Michael Kinsley, for the audience, if you hadn't followed that story, Michael Kinsley argued basically that it was not the place of journalists to decide what the public should and should not know. His infamous quote was, "That decision as to what we, the public, should know must ultimately be made by the government." Some people can't know. But it's the key there is that they are representing class interests, and we need to recognize them as a class, right? These journalists who are basically reflexively going to protect policies that are working against the public interest should not be trusted to inform us, right? We need to mark their names and remember what they're writing about. It's helpful that we get all these different views and they participate in the debate, they help inform us because we need that marketplace of ideas. But at the same time, when it's being done to actually limit debate, when they're saying these people shouldn't be able to make these points, these people shouldn't be able to publish these stories, this news should never end news, we need to watch out for that. Because that's not ever going to benefit the public. That's making society, that's making government, that's making institutions necessarily less accountable. And it's a chilling effect that we need to be watching for. In terms of class interests, again, when we talk about how do we fix this, how do we patch these holes, Julian Assange made a plea at one point where he said, hackers of the world unite, sysadmins of the world unite. Anybody out there who, posts on Stack Overflow, the Stack Exchange, anywhere like that, you guys are part of the technical elite, right? If you've even heard of Tor, or Tails, or Unix, or even OpenVPN, hell, if you've even heard of Linux, you are an advocate that is going to help us move forward in shifting the middle ground of technical literacy for the next generation, right? A lot of young people right now, they understand how technology works to an extent, but the system functions are hidden from them. They don't know where the dangers are, right? They don't know where their communications are exposed. They don't know how networking works. They trust their devices to handle everything. We all, any of us who know even the slightest bit, have a civic duty to help educate people around us. Just like the rise of literacy, right? We had an obligation to teach people around us how to read and write. We have to teach people in our society how to interact with society, with technology, safely, reliably, and in a way that serves the interests of all of us, not just a select few. We don't want a high priesthood of technology, no matter how good that is for us, because it's bad for the world. Mm-hmm. And I think I think, go ahead, Dan, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I was very struck by something you said in Vanity Fair, quote exactly, which is that every one of us, I was very struck, every one of us, and I believe this is absolutely true, has known things that were wrong, saw things, has seen things that were wrong, that should be known, that should be exposed, and as you put it, we have turned our eyes away because we were intimidated. And you were speaking of yourself, speaking of myself, we'll come back to that, but I believe that's true of every human on earth, that there are times when they bite their tongues, they keep their mouths shut because to reveal it would lose a relationship, or in very private matters, or a job, or a career, whatever, and they kept it shut. And then you said, but there comes a time, when the level of inhumanity or the wrongness is so great that you have to cross over that line. As you said, I crossed over that line. Now, to tell, after all. Now, I thought when I read that, that's Edward Snowden who did that. And that's Chelsea Manning. And how many others? When you said there comes a time when you, very generally, cross over that line and tell the truth, even at cost to your relationships, to your boss, to your friends, to your everything else. Most people, I have to say, never do reach that line. They never do reach a point when they decide to take a risk of their own status and their own relationships and their own job. And the test of that is that many of them have been tested on things like the continuation of a wrongful war. Thousands of lives, hundreds of thousands. In the case of tobacco, as I said, 500,000 lives a year lost by tobacco. Look at GM right now, a handful, but you know, striking where they deliberately covered up. Covered up is not only in the how many people at GM knew that lives were being lost and people were being injured, and who spoke out? Nobody, I don't think so. Tobacco, 2 people, Mayor Logan. One thing that I hope from you, Ed, from your example, is that more people will be inspired to take even significant risks. In other words, we're talking, you and I and the whole group here, about lowering the risks for people. And that's undoubtedly essential. But in the end, there will always be a risk, as you say, endpoint problems and so forth. And the willingness to take that risk for civilians is very rare. It was, as you may know, it was Bismarck, of all people, who said, civil courage, he almost invented that phrase, civil courage, is very, he only said courage on the battlefield is very common in our country, our Prussian country at that point. He says, but civil courage is another matter, it's very rare, this willingness to risk. Now, as I said, before Manning and before you, I virtually I have to say I'd almost given up on it. And you're showing an example now. Manning didn't get the, he got a lot of attention, but he didn't get the effect in this country, except, as I said earlier, for getting our troops home from Iraq, that you did. And why? Because I think in Manning's case, he was showing what we were doing to other people in the third world, foreigners, others, not us. And actually, in my case, was the effect because of the millions of Vietnamese that were being killed wrongly. Every one of them is wrong. When I read the Pentagon Papers and realized that for the first time, that the very beginning we were supporting a French colonial reconquest of a country, which I thought of as un-American, whether it was illegal internationally or not. I saw every death in Vietnam as being unjustified homicide. And to me, that was murder, mass murder, and I couldn't be part of that anymore. So I changed. Well, the American people didn't respond, I'm sorry to say, on the whole, except for people in audiences like this, to the mass murder, but there were 58,000 Americans in the process of dying then, see? And in your case, again, it wasn't so much directly dying, but what was being done to us, and people are objecting to that. So I think we have to have a different standard, and you show the possibility of it. Your colleagues in NSA, as you've said, agreed with you, many of them. This is wrong, it shouldn't be happening. But I have a mortgage, I have a marriage, I have, this and that, children to go to college, and that was enough. Even though we're talking about this massive, intrusion, which is a new world, basically, that people need to know about. So it shouldn't be only you. I would hope that some of your colleagues who I would suspect, let me give you a little piece of experience from my experience. If you were in a room with your former colleagues now, I would expect them to leave that room. They would not be in touch with you. If you can tell me that a former colleague from NSA has in any way communicated with you to say you did the right thing, or in any way, I would guess there was zero on that. That was my experience at the Rand Corporation. You lose every friend you have who has a clearance. That's all your friends. So, but you're not made of sugar, as you've shown. You can deal with that. I saw you say yesterday, wasn't it in the paper? If I'm in chains in Guantanamo,
That's
I
okay.
can live with that. Well, that didn't surprise me, Ed. That's the person I find you to be. That was not a surprise. It's a pretty unusual statement, after all, isn't it? Well, let's make it a little less unusual. You went in the Special Forces, tried to get, and had your legs broken, so forth, didn't go with it. I used my Marine training in Vietnam as a civilian. I had been a Marine company commander in peacetime. And so I used that training in Vietnam. So I saw combat. I walked with troops in combat. There you see courage, physical courage, every minute, every day. People say doing the job or trying to save their comrades. That kind of courage is marvelous. As a Marine once said at Tarawa, uncommon courage was a common virtue. Okay, right. When you're doing it for the boss, for the commander-in-chief, with the applause of your country, even if you don't get the applause, most of it is anonymous. But you know that they would approve you if they knew of it, what they were doing, and they would hold you accountable if you didn't do it. We should have a different standard than we do for our civilian officials. And not just official, I don't know if you regarding yourself as an official, but a middle-level person. It shouldn't be simply that you are the extraordinary hero that we thank. It should be that we should ask the question of those other people. What made you think you could keep this secret that long? Keep it totally. Keep your mouths. A lot of blood has flowed because people bit their tongues and swallowed their whistles and didn't speak out. And it's time, I think, that we not prosecute them, but tell them that is not the way to preserve a democracy. You are not fulfilling your oath. And I'll just end by saying, people ask, is he patriot or traitor? That's the headline and all these things. Edward Snowden, patriot, traitor. That drives me nuts. The very thought, that people could regard you as a traitor. The ignorance of the media and the Congress people and the interviewers who raise that question offends me as an American, that they think that it can be traitorous to tell the truth to your fellow countrymen. But instead of it, here's the standard I would like to see set. I'm sure the standard I would like to see set. Snowden was the one person in the fucking NSA who did what he absolutely should have done. How many people should have done what he did? Chelsea Manning. I said this about Chelsea when it came out, and I say it now. Patriot or traitor, so we all took the same oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. I've already said that people will violate it all the time. Thousands. There are people who are against it, like Cheney and some others. But when it comes to upholding that oath, no one in the U.S. military services, up to the commander-in-chief, has fulfilled her oath to defend and support the Constitution like Chelsea Manning, and no one in the U.S. executive branch, in any branch, has fulfilled your oath, the oath to uphold and support the Constitution as well as you. So thank you.
I would, I'm still politically very moderate. I think, it's funny, the very first time I met Glenn Greenwald, sort of the lead journalist that I talked to in Hong Kong, he called me a radical. And that was a surprise to me because that was the first time I had ever been called a radical. But he didn't mean it in a bad way.
He called you what? Say it again.
A radical.
Radical action. Radical action.
Right. But the key is, I think there are so many people throughout the government, throughout the country, who are trying to do the right thing. But as you said, there is this burden, this compulsion, this operational inertia, where they feel, we talked about this in the office, people who saw this was wrong, who agreed this was wrong, who were disturbed by it, and who felt we needed to do something. But at the same time, we all have families. We all have mortgages. We all have lives. We all have things we want to do, things we want to enjoy.
As you did. You did too.
Right. I mean, I loved Hawaii. Everybody, I don't have to say I love my family. But you put those things at risk, and I knew the highest possibility of when I walked out of the office in Hawaii on the last day was that I would never make it out of the airport. But I accepted that because I knew that, as you said earlier, we all have a limit to the level of incivility, of inhumanity we can see and do nothing about. And when you cross that line, you have to do something. But at the same time, we can't judge people too harshly for human nature. People have a different analysis, a different weighting of the risk, at least for me. What's important for us is not to condemn them, but to enable them, to empower them. I don't want to take a negative stance of judging them and saying, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You didn't do what you swore you would do. Even if that is the case, I think of it from an engineer's perspective and go, how can we fix it? How can the people in this room reduce the costs to action? How can the people in this room, how can the people around the world, how can anyone who's seen what's happened in the last year, what thoughts do you have about how we can make sure we get the truth of what our governments are doing? That we have a seat at the table of government, regardless of how authoritarian our government, regardless of what their response would be, because when they do something wrong, we will know about it. And they won't know who told the world about it. And critically, this is the thing. This is not about anarchy. This is not about wiping out government. This is about saying when governments realize that when they do unlawful things, when they do unconstitutional things, or when they do things that are entirely legal but comprehensively immoral, we will find out about it. That will change the world. That will change the way we live. Because the problem today is when you bring, a case when the system we have today is secret agencies operating under secret policies, secret interpretations of laws, overseen by secret courts, rubber stamp courts, who in 35 years have said no only 13 times out of 35,000. When that's the way it goes, and they're overseen by these congressmen who are getting their pockets stuffed full of dollars by these intelligence contracting companies, what the government has done, when we look at this, any one of those steps in isolation, the fact that it takes 10 years to get this heard in an open court, at the Supreme Court instead of the secret court, when we look at what that is in isolation, any step, it might look like clever lawyering by the government. But when we look at it comprehensively, what it is the government has developed an exploit chain that provides basically the root password to our Constitution. They've escaped the sandbox of our democracy, and they're basically using it to change our Bill of Rights without us seeing it. And we would go, what does the Bill of Rights say? The rootkit is telling us, oh, well, the Fourth Amendment is still there. But in reality, it's gone. Something completely different is happening behind the scenes. And we can't allow that. And the only way we can stop that from being sort of a retrospective action, where we go back and investigate and try to figure out who did something wrong, who we should hold to account, is we have to make sure we stop it before it happens. And the only way that's going to happen is if we have transparency and we have accountability for the senior officials who fucked up in the first place.
First of all, let me say I agree. I understand what you're saying. Don't condemn these people, or that isn't the important thing. But you and I aren't talking. We're having a real discussion here because we do have a somewhat different focus, and I happen to think that both approaches are important. Let me distinguish. Actually, when I keep mentioning this 40 years between 1973, when my trial ended, in 2013. When you came out, that was 40 years, or 71, 2010, and so forth. I, in fact, came to feel that I was apparently just asking too much. That somehow, you keep saying, you know, everybody has a limit. And what I was seeing was, no, a few people have a limit. And most of them have no, by the way, as you said, there's no question, at all times, there are people in the system who are criticizing, who are raising questions, who are even, you know, saying this is wrong or whatnot, up to a point, as you did before, you know, you went all the way and talked to other people. But their limit is going outside channels, going to the public, that limit doesn't get crossed. They're taking a risk even complaining or criticizing, some of them. And they may even lose their jobs as a result eventually, but they get another job as long as they haven't broken that promise to keep their mouth shut about anything. See, they can get another job then. They can be trusted. They will stay inside the system like George Bush. Anyway, during the Vietnam War. But they don't. So I come to feel apparently nobody can do this. I don't know. It's so necessary and it's so obvious. The price of not doing it, the price of the government achieving total control of the embarrassing things and the plans is Vietnam War and the Iraq War. The approach to climate we've had right along, the nuclear weapons policies, which are incredibly reckless, insanely reckless, that have gone on without exposure from people on the inside. They don't have a limit. So as I was saying, you and Manning did show me there are some people out there. I've always felt that there were more who had the capability to cross that line than we were seeing. And the, you know, the advantage. And your approach is to make it less dangerous, less risky. And I think that's essential and can be done. And the people in this very room are contributing to that and can contribute to that. As we were speaking last time, you and me, I have, being not a technologist, less optimism about technology than you have. You know infinitely more about it than I do, but I'm more than twice the age you are. And the future of Titanics, let's say, is in my mind, even though that was before me. But the Challenger, for example, and I don't put it's hard for me to believe that all these people together will make the process of telling embarrassing things about the government, which is exactly what the public needs to know, to hold them accountable, to have an influence on policy, that can be made totally riskless. I think that there will remain a risk of some kind. And
I think that's fair to say. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to...
You probably agree with that.
Yeah. There's never going to be a fully risk-free thing, but what we can do is we can mitigate this. And we can try to make it a little bit more available, a little bit less painful.
Okay.
And
yeah, I'm saying what you're saying, if I may say, is crucial. It's crucial that they do that, and what you're saying is crucial. But I just want to put in a word for what I've been saying here, which is to hope that people like you and the others who've been speaking out here, like Tom Drake and Jesselyn Radak, and the other